Has the news been getting you down? I'm Megan McArdle, and I'm here to help. I'm the host of a news show from Washington Post Opinion called Reasonably Optimistic, and it's an antidote to the pessimism that's riddling America right now. Every Wednesday, I'm going to talk to people who see a path forward.
It does seem to me that there is some awakening of a desire to act together, to solve problems where they are.
I am a believer in America, and it's worth fighting for.
Join me Wednesdays on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, and welcome to Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am your host, John Rothman. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to hit the follow button on the top right of Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening at this very moment. When you hit follow, leave a review or share an episode with a friend. It helps other people discover the show, keeps us going. As I like to point out each and every day, it expands our base. It is difficult when I sit down to record every day to decide what it is that I should address. But I want to talk for a moment about what's happening in Iran. We have pointed out in the past that there has been no vote of authorization, no referendum, no reaction in terms of Congress to what is happening in Iran. I want to point out that the administration is now talking about requesting a $200 billion appropriation to pay for what is happening. And the president used an expression the other day that it was a small price to pay. He said it yesterday. I want to be very clear with you about this. The chance for Congress to weigh in on what is happening in Iran will be when, on the floor of the United States Senate, a request for $200 billion supplemental appropriation for the purpose of conducting the war in Iran comes to the floor. That's when we'll know, because Republicans and Democrats will have to make a fundamental decision. Now, I want to be clear about something. The president is sending troops to the Middle East. We all know that. He's doing it now. There's all sorts of talk about occupying the island. There's talk about maybe, just maybe, putting ground troops in. There's even talk about regime change. There is talk also about the differences between the Israeli objective and the American objective. But the simple truth is that when push comes to shove, Congress will have to go on record. Now, let me explain that the other day I spoke directly about what happened in Vietnam in 1975, when Gerald Ford wanted to move forward to save the South Vietnamese regime. Congress refused to appropriate the money. And as I pointed out yesterday, but I want to do it one more time, Gerald Ford was a creature of Congress. He understood that he had to listen to what Congress had to say. We know that if Richard Nixon had been president, he would have ignored what Congress had to say. He wrote it, he talked about it. Had Spiro Agnew become president, he would have proceeded along the same lines as Richard Nixon. But Gerald Ford was a creature of Congress and understood the limitations which presidents faced. The Congress refused to appropriate money, and of course, Vietnam became a memory. No longer something in which we were vitally involved, in which we had troops on the ground. I say this because now Congress will have to go on record. If a bill comes before the Congress requesting $200 billion, and if Donald Trump's words, a small price to pay, are accepted, then there will be congressional authorization. Here is my question. If Congress does not authorize $200 billion, what then? What will the president do? And what will the implications be for American policy in the Middle East? There is no doubt that this is a presidency driven by one man's view of what ought to happen. As he has put it, it's in his gut. Well, let me tell you that what Congress may administer to the President of the United States is a gut punch. So there will be an opportunity for the American people to speak out. And whatever the decision, there will no doubt be a reckoning in November. Who voted for? Who voted against? But let me also be clear about something else. It is very difficult for a member of Congress, when American troops are engaged in a war, not to appropriate funds. But that well may be what happens. And may I say, if I were a member of Congress, that would be the challenge. How if you are a Republican or a Democrat, when the President of the United States has moved troops into combat? How do you say to your constituents, I'm not voting for this appropriation? Every member of the House and Senate will be thinking carefully about that question. But I believe that in the end, when you consider $200 billion, well, there are a lot of people in Congress who are going to vote no. Now, let's stop and think for a minute. What happens if members of Congress vote no on this supplemental appropriation? What does the president do then? Well, I can tell you, if the president is the commander-in-chief and he wants to proceed, I don't know how you stop him. But this, my friends, is the vote, which is not a declaration of war, but it is a declaration of how we feel about what's happening in Iran. And let me point out, as I say this, that the situation continues to grow more perilous. We are seeing the Arab Emirates, including Kuwait, being hit by missiles coming from Iran. There is no doubt that Iran represents a danger to the security of the world. So here's my question. Where is the world? Oh, I know there is great unhappiness with Donald Trump, but there should be great unhappiness with Iran as well. And where is the manifestation of that distress? I'm asking you the question because I believe it to be the central question of the hour. And now, let's move on to another fascinating question dealing with Iran. How do we put it back together? I don't know. I don't know that there is a way to recover from what is clearly a devastating air campaign. But one thing we have learned, an air campaign alone, even the removal of the Iranian leadership, cannot itself facilitate a revolution. More and more, we understand that in order for there to be regime change in Iran, the world has to act. No, I'm not in favor of putting American troops into Iran without really understanding the implications. But I am asking, where is the United Nations? What would happen if the United Nations voted, essentially, to establish a trusteeship over Iran? That the UN would, in fact, become the monitoring operation. I believe there would be substantial support for that. But you and I understand that this is a president who doesn't care about alliances, who doesn't care about this kind of thing, and you can see it directly in the reaction of our European allies. And once again, the administration is dissing our allies. Let me assure you, an ally is not someone who marches in lockstep with the President of the United States. A real alliance means that there are differences which need to be addressed. But for this president to continue to disparage NATO, to continue to disparage the post-World War II alliances, for this president to attack individuals, including, I heard him yesterday say about Macron of France, who cares? He's going to be out of office soon. There is something wrong with the way this president proceeds. And speaking of something being wrong, can you imagine the President of the United States of America sitting in the Oval Office with the Prime Minister of Japan making the kind of crack he made about Pearl Harbor? It was an incredibly unimaginable moment. And if I had been the Prime Minister of Japan, what do? You can't stand up and walk out. You can't grimace. You can't disagree. All you can do is sit there and take it. But take a look at the reaction in Japan. There is fury that this president would raise the question of Pearl Harbor in the way that he did. And if you haven't heard the president's actual words, Google it. There is something wrong. And I want to say a quick word about an interview that J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, did yesterday. He said something quite remarkable. He said, there is something wrong with Donald Trump. And he referred particularly to his experiences with dementia. And he said, he's watched it a lot. There is something wrong with Donald Trump. This is a serious question. And in the question and answer session, which we will do immediately upon the conclusion of this podcast, same link, so you won't have to go anywhere else, I will deal with the application of this matter. There are serious questions that need to be answered, and there has to be accountability. And maybe, just maybe, the president's request for $200 billion will provide the opportunity for Democrats and Republicans in the House and Senate to stand up and deal with this problem. And maybe, just maybe, a president of the United States and his conversation with the Prime Minister of Japan may provoke more concerns about the stability of the president. I don't say this lightly, and I want to be clear. I'm not a fan of Donald Trump. I believe Donald Trump is an existential threat to American democracy. But to speak as we are now about a president of the United States who seems to me to be out of control, that, my friends, is a real question. And I will define in the question and answer period, at the request of one of those who's asked questions, how you apply Article 2, Section 4 of the Constitution to Donald Trump. I want you all to understand that there are many, many issues which need to be addressed. Perhaps one of the most consequential will be the debate on the Save America Act, the absolutely horrific bill that is being proposed by Donald Trump and the Republicans. What they've done is absolutely fascinating. They've taken the United States Senate hostage. The Republicans are agreeing with Donald Trump. No substantive business until this is dealt with. This, my friends, is a breaking point. And I hope and I believe that there will be real challenges to Donald Trump in the days ahead. What worries me and should worry all of us, is what this president is doing every single day and the decisions that are being made in the White House every single day. And the question of whether or not this is good or bad on so many issues is being addressed every single day. It's going to be an interesting weekend. I'm not back until Monday, but we will see what happens on this important weekend where critical decisions may be made dealing with Iran and dealing with American policy with our neighbors. These are serious times. And although some of you worry about the fact that we have to talk about Donald Trump all the time, It goes to show something I have said repeatedly: the central importance of the President of the United States. And we better be darn careful when it comes to 2028, or perhaps sooner. I don't want to conclude this particular section without mentioning J.D. Vance. Keep your eye on the Vice President. He is the heir apparent. It's interesting, I was just reading a book by John Rhodes, who was the Republican leader in the House of Representatives during the Watergate crisis. And John Rhodes pointed out that Nixon was safe until Spiro Agnew was forced to resign. Had Agnew been vice president, the man in line to succeed to Richard Nixon in the midst of Watergate, it was the conclusion of Leader Rhodes that Nixon would never have been removed. Let me point out we better take a hard look at J.D. Vance, and yes, at Speaker Johnson. These are serious times. Make no mistake. Thanks for tuning into another episode of Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am John Rothman, and you understand very clearly, and I think this is the important point. I would love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. You can write a review on Apple Podcasts, drop a comment on YouTube or Spotify, click any of the links in the show notes to connect with me on social media. I want to know what you think, and so does Go-Go Zoger. Remember to share this episode with a friend or colleague so we can continue to grow. Now, when I'm through in just a few seconds with my conclusion of this main part of the podcast, I will go straight into question and answers. So stay with me. Don't go anywhere. And of course, this show has been getting so much positive attention that we are excited to bring on our advertising support. And I can assure you that we will do our best to make sure that this podcast grows and expands. I want to say a special thank you to Go-Go Zoger. And now let's go to question and answers. The first question is from Scott. It is a question on killing Iran's leaders. They, capital They, tried 3 times in America for going after our leader. Are we supposed to wait until they succeed before we do something about it? The answer, of course, is no. We have every right to be doing what we're doing, and Iran is a threat to all of us. There can be and must be no mistake about that. But I also want to point out what was understood very clearly back in the 1970s when Gerald Ford said, "We cannot move to assassinate foreign leaders. They may well try to do it to us." That is the result. And security around Donald Trump has grown. Now, Casson asks a question. Article 2, Section 4, manifesting now. So I have in my hand my copy of the Constitution of the United States. And I want to read to you Article 2, Section 4. The President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Article 2, Section 4. So let me explain very carefully, very precisely, so there is no ambiguity about this. In order to remove a president of the United States on grounds of impeachment, the House, in order to vote, has to receive a resolution from the Judiciary Committee. The Judiciary Committee is chaired by Jim Jordan, one of Donald Trump's staunchest supporters. The Republicans control the House of Representatives. There is no way for an impeachment resolution to be sent to the floor of the House of Representatives. And let's assume for a minute that it were to be okay to send an impeachment resolution to the floor of the House. Would it pass? And the answer is no. As long as Speaker Johnson chooses to support the president, there will be no actionable work to remove a president. Let me point out that if you are looking at this logically, what you would do is say, if the Republicans were in the opposition and Donald Trump were a Democrat, how long do you think it would take for a resolution to be submitted calling for the impeachment of the president? The idea was that impeachment was not supposed to be partisan. And you will recall that the one case of partisan impeachment which really happened was Andrew Johnson in 1868. And it failed. It failed because it was partisan. By one vote, by the way, the vote of Edmund Ross, United States Senator from Kansas, a Republican, who voted against removing Andrew Johnson. You can read about it, by the way, in Profiles in Courage by John F. Kennedy, because Edmund Ross is one of the profiles in Courage. We saw it in the case of Bill Clinton, where not enough Democrats were willing to vote for the removal of the president, and so Bill Clinton remained in office. Oh, you're asking me, what about Richard Nixon? And the answer is that Richard Nixon never faced impeachment because he resigned before there could be an impeachment resolution submitted by the House Judiciary Committee. Remember, there were articles of impeachment drawn up, but Nixon resigned before there was a vote on the House floor. Although it is interesting to note that after Nixon's resignation, there was a vote on the House floor and the articles would have been approved. Donald Trump is not going to be impeached given the current situation. Now remember, it is the function of the House of Representatives to impeach, but it is the job of the United States Senate to hold a trial and either convict or acquit. Let me remind you that in the case of Bill Clinton, he was acquitted. And so we have seen Senate trials. I want to say a word about the 25th Amendment, although there is no formal question here. If you read the 25th Amendment, which has to do with presidential incapacity and the replacement of vice president, as we've talked about in the past, you know that twice a vice president has been nominated under the 25th Amendment and been approved. The first, when Spiro Agnew resigned and Gerald Ford was nominated and confirmed. And then when Gerald Ford became president, his decision to nominate Nelson Rockefeller, who was also confirmed. But the real point of the 25th Amendment was presidential inability to perform the duties of their office. That was included because of the case of Woodrow Wilson, who became incapacitated in September of 1919, but who remained president until March 4th, 1921. But the question was, what would happen if a president had a severe stroke or some other situation, like President Eisenhower, who had a heart attack, an attack of ileitis, and a stroke in 1955, 56, and 57. There was no 25th Amendment, but Eisenhower and then former Vice President Richard Nixon worked with Senator Birch Bayh of Indiana to compose the 25th Amendment. So the question becomes, if J.D. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, is correct, and there is really something wrong with Donald Trump, what then would happen? And the answer is, under the 25th Amendment, it would require the vice president and a majority of the cabinet to vote to remove the president. Given the current situation of loyalty to Donald Trump, I don't think that's at all likely. This, my friends, is a serious question. And we also need to understand something else: the consequences of understanding the importance of the vice presidency. Richard Nixon privately said that Spiro Agnew was his insurance policy. And I believe that John Rhodes was right. If Agnew had been vice president, the whole question of Watergate would have been handled differently. But there was trust in the Congress of Gerald Ford. And if you remember, at the beginning of this podcast, I spoke about Gerald Ford being a creature of Congress. He was the House leader, the leader of the Republicans, for a period of time in the 1960s. The 1950s. God, we're going back decades now, aren't we? Gerald Ford was the House leader from 1965 until 1973, when he became vice president. But there was a trust in Gerald Ford. I can't say today that there is that kind of trust of J.D. Vance, who I would remind you is a man who has called the United States a Christian nation. There are a lot of questions which need to be asked, but this is a serious moment in the history of the American presidency and the Constitution. This question comes in from Kevgor. What are the Republicans doing to stop our elections? Well, there's no question there is real concern about the legitimacy of the election of 2026. If the Save America Act, as it is called, is passed by the House and Senate and signed by the President, the legitimacy of the elections of 2026 and, yes, 2028 would, in my mind, be called into question. The Senate is going to discuss this in detail. Indeed, the President has said he won't sign any bills until this one is dealt with. Well, let me tell you, this also is a constitutional crisis. The elections must proceed and will proceed, I believe, because Democrats and Republicans alike don't want to mess with this. However, there is a majority in the House and evidently a majority in the Senate, but everyone knows that for the Save America Act to be implemented, there would be a need for 60 votes in the United States Senate. There is not a chance of a snowball in hell of 60 votes. Somebody asked me what would happen if Donald Trump declared a national emergency. This, my friends, is not likely to happen. And even if it did, remember, elections are held state by state. No president can suspend national elections. I believe that with all my heart. And if, in fact, there was an effort to do that, you and I know that the whole question of the future of the American democratic system would be in jeopardy. Now, Derek asks this about Donald Trump and the Japanese Prime Minister. Derek says, "Come on, John, it's hilarious." No, it's not hilarious. It's deadly serious. For a president of the United States of America to joke about something so critical as what happened at Pearl Harbor, having to do with secrecy. He turned to the Japanese Prime Minister and said, "You understand why I wasn't able to talk about what we're doing in Iran? Secrecy, just like Pearl Harbor. Why didn't you tell us?" This, to me, was one of the lowest moments in the Oval Office. It is a disgrace. Now, here's the problem. There is disgrace after disgrace being committed by this president. And the reaction is, it's just too much. I want to agree with Governor J.D. Pritzker when he said yesterday, clearly, that there is something wrong with Donald Trump. My friends, you can support Donald Trump's policies. I don't agree with many of them, but you can support them. But ask me directly about Donald Trump and what he's doing. I believe he's off the rails. I believe there is something wrong. I agree with J.D. Pritzker. Will something be done? Only if an extreme action is taken by this president, which alienates the Republicans in Congress. But I want to say one last thing. The American people will have to judge in November. Whether or not they want Donald Trump and the Republicans to continue to have the kind of power they have, I believe, with perfect faith, that there will be an electoral response to these kinds of, unbelievable statements by Donald Trump. And I think the Republicans are going to lose. I think they're going to lose because they support Donald Trump. The referendum in November may not have Donald Trump on the ballot, but the results of the election will determine the future of Donald Trump's presidency. Well, that's it for Question and Answers today. I will be back on Monday. Who knows where the world will be, but I know where you and I will be. We'll be right here on Around the Political World with John Rothman, along with Gogo Zoger, who makes it all happen. Have a great weekend. See you Monday.
Has the news been getting you down? I'm Megan McArdle, and I'm here to help. I'm the host of a news show from Washington Post Opinion called Reasonably Optimistic, and it's an antidote to the pessimism that's riddling America right now. Every Wednesday, I'm going to talk to people who see a path forward.
It does seem to me that there is some awakening of a desire to act together to solve problems where they are.
I am a believer in America, and that's worth fighting for.
Join me Wednesdays on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.